Hello ladies and gentle ladies, and welcome back to another Forge modding tutorial for Minecraft 1.20. And in this tutorial we are going to be creating a creative tab. So as I'm sure some of you are aware, creative tabs have changed a lot recently from 1.19.2 to 1.19.3. I think they also changed a bit in 1.19.4, and now they've changed again in 1.20, and they've changed pretty massively again this time. So let's get started, and I'll show you how you can make one yourself and how we can add to a vanilla one. So firstly, we're actually going to create an initialization or a registry class for this, because now you actually register creative tabs, which is a really interesting concept, because I wouldn't really consider them a registry, but they are now, so that's what we use. So same as with blocks and with items, we just call this our creative tab init, and in here we're just same as before going to want a public static final deferred register. If you don't know what a deferred register is, obviously you can check out my previous two tutorials on items and blocks, which you would kind of need to watch if you're going to add a creative tab anyways, so I'm sure you already know what this is, but if not, go check those tutorials out. Now this will be of type CreativeModeTab, as I'm sure you can guess, and we'll call it tabs, and that is equal DeferredRegister.create. Now here we usually do something like Forge registries dot and then one of these. Now you see if we put CreativeModeTab in here, it doesn't pop up. There's also Forge registries.keys, which we'll use in the future, but once again creative tabs don't pop up in there. So how do we actually register a creative mode tab? Well, you can actually see that there are three different options for what we can put in this create method. So we can give it an iForge registry, which would be the forge registries dot etc. We can give it a resource key, which is like forge registries dot keys dot whatever. And you can also give it a resource location, which is, for example, if you're going to create a custom registry, then you would give it the resource location of whatever you named that registry. Now, vanilla actually has their own registry classes in a class called registries. If you come in here, you can see a bunch of different things, but the important thing to note is that these are resource keys. So we can just do registries.creativeModeTab, and that will work. That'll work perfectly fine. Obviously we need to give our mod ID, of course, and boom, you see that works. We don't have any errors. So fantastic. From there, we're going to do same as we have with blocks and items. We're going to want the registry object of type CreativeModeTab. I'm going to call mine example tab is equal tabs.register. Then we give it a name, same as I've been saying before. We don't have spaces, we don't have special characters, we just keep it A to Z numbers, underscores, forward slashes, and dots. But mine will just be example tab, and then we can come down on a new line and we want a supplier of a new creative mode tab, but that's actually not right. So we don't actually do a new something. In this circumstance, we actually do creative mode tab dot builder, and then on that builder we can supply all of the different properties that our creative mode tab should use. So the first property, and possibly the most important one, is the title. And effectively this will be whatever the name of the tab is when it shows up in the creative tabs tab selection screen. So what we want here generally is to do a component.translatable, and this creates a text component that can be translated in your language file. So for example, our en_us.json, we would put whatever is in here in that JSON and it would get translated for us. Alternatively, you can put a component.literal, which will just be a literal string of your tab name. Generally, you don't want to do this though, because that means it can't be translated, which obviously isn't very good. And you would only use that for something like if it was just a number or something, maybe, then it wouldn't need to be translated. So yeah, but we'll keep it as component.translatable. Now you see there are actually other components in here as well, some of which you can use for this if you want. I'm not sure exactly what all of these do. I'm only familiar with empty, literal, and translatable, but I'm sure maybe some of the others could be useful. I'm not sure. But we'll do translatable. And in here we just want to give it a string. Now we do in this string item group, and make sure you do a capital G. Well, actually, you don't have to. You don't have to do it this way. This is just what vanilla does. You'll see here, this is the Minecraft Dev plugin that's doing this autocomplete here, by the way. You will see that it's showing me all of the existing ones that follow this schema. So you'll see all the vanilla ones here are using item group with a capital G. That's just what vanilla does. I guess you don't have to do it like that. You could just do like tab dot something. I'm gonna stick with vanilla though and do kind of the vanilla thing. So item group dot, and then effectively it's just going to be the name of your tab once again. So mine was example tab. Now something you will notice here is it's a capital, right? And we said that you can't have capitals. Now that is true, except for keys inside of language files. They can have any case. You can have capitals or lowercase. Generally, you should have it lowercase, but for some reason, vanilla has an exception here where they use capitals. I don't really know why. I think that's just a Mojang thing. But obviously, for your actual registry name here, that must be lowercase. It's just the component, the translation component here, that can have caps. Then moving on from the title, we can specify other properties too. And I'm not going to go through all of these different properties, and you can kind of figure them out by yourself. Most of them should be fairly self-explanatory. So for example, you can set an icon. You can tell it to have a search bar, and you can tell it to have a search bar with a specific width. You can say that it should be aligned to the right. You can give it a background. You can hide the title. You can say that there should be no scroll bar. You can give it a background location. You can give it colors, etc., etc. I'm just going to go through icon and display items. So we'll do icon first. So I want the icon of mine to be using our example item here. So all I'm going to do is say item init.example item. And you'll see that doesn't work. So let's see what it's asking for. It is asking for a supplier of an item stack, whereas we have given it a registry object of an item. So if you do recall from our item tutorial, registry objects are just suppliers. So that part matches technically. However, we've given it an item instead of an item stack, and that's because if we come in here, you'll see this registry object of an item. So how do we get an item stack? So there's a few ways we can do that. And the first, maybe most obvious, is just to literally create a normal supplier and do a new item stack, and then just pass in our item init.example item, and we need to do .get because that requires the actual item object, and that does work. To get rid of this error, let's just get rid of this error so we can much easier see what's going wrong here and what's fine. We can just do .build, and that will build the builder into the registry object. So you'll see we have no errors now. Well, I do have this one, and that will be fixed later when we create the translation key. But you see that does work. So the item stack asks for an item like, which is just something that the item class inherits from. But I don't like to do it this way, because there is, I would say, a better way to define an item stack, especially if it only has a singular item in it. So what I like to do is, for example, item init dot example item dot get, and then colon get default instance. So what does this do? So what this does is, this is still a supplier. So this is actually something known as a method reference. Now this is a Java thing, so I'm not going to go and explain what a method reference is. I'll leave a resource in the description to what a method reference is if you are a bit confused, because they are a little bit advanced. Effectively what this is doing is saying, it's saying a supplier like this of item init example item get default instance. It's effectively doing this, but instead of having this lambda here, we're just putting these double colons, which tells it that basically when it has this object, it will call this get default instance method when it's ready, is effectively what's going on. It's quite hard to explain, but once you've used it a couple times, you'll understand exactly what it's doing. But yeah, that's how I like to do it. This get default instance method just creates the new item stack, by the way. It's something that can be overridden in your item class if you need to do that. So that's why I like to use this one, just in case you wanted some special functionality on the default instance. Maybe you wanted to, for example, add some NBT to a default instance, you would do that in here. So that's why I like to use that method instead of creating the item stack myself. The next thing we need to do is actually add stuff to our creative tab, right? So there's a method for this called display items. Now you'll see here that this is a by consumer, and it has these two parameters here that we don't know what they are because they are unnamed. So if we come into here, you can see that this is the item display parameters and the output. So let's name them. We'll go display params. You can see that IntelliJ does actually give us names that it thinks might be relevant. I'm just going to call it display params, and I'm just going to call this one output. Okay, so effectively what we can do here is we can use these two different things to say what it should, how they should be displayed inside of our creative tab. So we can do, for example, like we can get stuff from the display params, we can see if they have permission, we can get the enabled feature flags, and we can see if it contains feature flag dot whatever. It's actually feature flags, isn't it? There you go. We can see if it contains these different things and all of that. But generally what you want to do here is use the output. And all we do is we say output dot accept, and then we say the item that we want to add. So for example, we want to add our example item, so we just do item init dot example item, and we need to do dot get because it wants an item like instead of the actual registry object. And boom, you can do that for all of your different items, right? So output dot accept item init dot example block item dot get, and that works fine. However, to do this for every single one of your items might be a little bit tedious, and you might forget sometimes. So I generally like to do this a little bit different, and I like to just create a list of items that I want to add to this, and then just loop through them and add them like that. So I'm just going to quickly make a mock-up of how to do that, and I'll briefly explain the code afterwards. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added my method for doing this. Let's go through and explain what I've done here. So first of all, you can see I've added this list of items here. So this is the list of example tab items. So what this is just a list of suppliers of something that extends item like. So if you recall, I mentioned item like is items. Also blocks are item likes. So you can add a block to a tab as well, which is a bit weird, bearing in mind blocks aren't items, but it happens, it happens. So this is what this list is. And you see here I've added this method that says it's public, it's static, so we can call it from any class. And we say that T is something that extends item. And this returns a registry object of said item. And we are calling this add to tab. This takes in a registry object of that T that we defined here. And this is the item like. We're adding this to our list up here, and then we're just returning it. And you'll see in here in display items, what I've done is I'm looping through this list, and for each of those item likes in this list, I'm saying that the output should accept that item like, but we have to call .get because these are suppliers. And then in my item init, I'm saying on each of these items, I've surrounded this items.register call with a CreativeTab init.addToTab, which is this method right here. And I've done that for the block item as well. And effectively what this does is it adds those items to the tabs automatically. Now that's going to sound like a lot, and I'm fully aware that is going to sound quite complicated possibly. So if you think that sounds too complicated, then just don't worry about it and just add them normally inside of this display items. That's perfectly fine, and obviously there's nothing stopping you from doing that. However, personally I find this a little bit cleaner. I'm not personally a fan though of this whole method here, so something I might want to do is just statically import this add to tab method so that that looks a bit cleaner there. And if this was actually my own mod, right, so if I was creating this as a proper mod, I would probably just create a method that does this whole add to tab, and it does the items.register thing by itself, right, so that I don't have to do this whole part every single time. There's just a method that does this part. That would be great, and maybe on the GitHub I'll have a method that shows you this. That kind of thing, but for now I think this is fine. Obviously if you don't want to do it like that, you don't have to. You can do it like before. As I said, that is completely up to you. Okay, the next thing is how can we add to a vanilla tab? So this is fairly simple really. So we can do @mod.eventBusSubscriber, and we're going to say here inside of these brackets that the mod ID is tutorialmod.modid. Oh, by the way, this needs to be at the top of your class. I don't think I said that. So it needs to be above your class definition. And we also need to say a bus is equal bus.mod, like that. So what does this do? Well, in the items tutorial, I briefly explained the whole deferred registry being added to the event bus, if you can recall. Now, effectively what this does is this tells Forge that this class is subscribing to that bus. So when the bus has its events that fire, right, when it gets to a stop, it's saying that at this stop, this class has events that need to be put on that bus, right? So these events need to listen for that bus. And we're saying the bus that we want to listen to is the mod bus. Now, which bus you choose to listen to depends on what event you want to use. The specific event that I'm going to be using in this tutorial is a mod event. That's just, it is something it is. So but you may also have forge events for certain things as well. And there is also the option here to add a value, which would be like a dist, which I always forget what dist stands for, but it stands for something. And that is basically the different side, or the networking side that you're on. So if it's client or dedicated server, the event that I'm going to be covering is just common. So it's on both sides, so we don't need to worry about that. But how do we actually subscribe to this event bus subscriber? Well, it's fairly simple, and actually there's several ways you can do this, but I'm just going to be showing you the easiest, and I think the easiest to understand way, and that is to use @subscribe_event, and this will be public static void. It's very important that this is public, it's very important that this is static, and it's very important that this is void. So make sure you do have that exact signature. And what you call this method doesn't really matter, but I'm going to call this build contents. And this needs to take in one parameter, and that is the specific event that you want to listen to. Now the event that I want to listen to is the build CreativeModeTab content event, which is quite a handful to say. Effectively, what this does is we're saying that this bus, what happens here is Forge will look for classes that are annotated with this annotation. It will look what bus it's annotated with, and it will tell that bus to look through this class and find methods that have the @subscribe event. And it'll take those methods, it'll first see if it can access them, right? So if they're public static and they're void, and then it'll check that it only takes in this singular parameter, which needs to be something that is an event. The specific event here is the build CreativeModeTab event. Now you can actually see this implements something called iModEventBus, which tells us that it is a mod event and not a Forge event. You can also see that in the Java doc here. You can see this event is fired on the mod specific event bus, and actually it's only on the logical client. That's something that I wasn't aware of. So that's actually super interesting that it's on the logical client. So we can actually also specify a side here is equal dist.client. Now you don't need to do this, by the way. You don't need to specify that it's on the client. That's just something I like to do to say that if I come back to this in the future, I know not to, put in server events in here, because I know that this is for client stuff and not for server stuff. But anyways, what do we need to do in this event to add to a vanilla tab? So this is fairly simple, really. We just say if event.tab key, get tab key, is equal to CreativeModeTabs dot, and then whatever tab you want to check for example, building blocks. So if the tab key is building blocks, then we can say event.accept, and then we can add whatever we want to that tab. So we can add, for example, our example block to the building blocks. So let's do that. Let's do item init dot example block item, and boom, that works. Now you see this does accept a supplier, so we can just use the supplier version here instead of doing .get, and that's fine. Now what if we wanted to add a vanilla item to our tab? Now if we, for whatever reason, we didn't want to use this display items, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to, but let's say we didn't, we can also do this for our tab as well. So we can say if event.tab is equal example tab, then we can add whatever we want to our tab. And we actually need to do .get here, because if you recall, this is a registry object, which is a supplier. So if the tab is our tab, then we can say like event.accept, and we could maybe add a vanilla item to it, right? So we could say items dot, what do we want to add? Maybe we want to add the crossbow to our tab, and that would work. You can use this. This is kind of what we used to do in 1.19.1 4 and 3, I think. And it works fine. So you can do that instead of doing this display items. Like I could literally just take this part right here. I could remove that display items and I could just put it in here. And obviously as long as I do event.accept, and you see that does work, right? So those are interchangeable, whichever one you do is up to you. I'm going to leave it this way because this is the way that Forge recommends that you do it. Whether or not you listen to Forge is completely up to you. I wouldn't say Forge are always the best in terms of their opinions, especially when it comes from the higher ups, but that's completely something for a completely different time. But yeah, it's up to you which way you decide to do it. I'm just going to do it the way they recommend you do it so that I don't get absolutely attacked for it. That's pretty much it. And there is one thing which some of you may have noticed, some of you may not have noticed, but what you need to do is you need to register the deferred register, which is something we haven't done yet. And obviously if we didn't do that, then it wouldn't work. So we need to just do CreativeTab init, .tabs.register. Fairly simple. Now I am just going to add this to our language file as well. So let's come in there and let's just say that this is the example tab. Now you probably won't have, that thing come up. So obviously you can just do it manually. It's just a great thing about the Minecraft Dev plugin that you can have it done automatically for you. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Well, that is it. So let's run the game. All right, everyone. So we're in the game. Now let's go first test if our item is added to the building blocks, right? If our block is added in here. So we'll scroll down to the bottom and boom, you'll see our block is in the building blocks. Now there are also methods, by the way, to put it in a specific location. I think you can say, I don't remember exactly how you do it. Let's mess around with the code for a quick second here and see if we can find how you do that. Okay, here you go. So there is the method for get entries. Now you see this is a mutable hashed linked map, which means that we can mutate it. So we can say event.getEntries, and you can say like put after, put before, put first. So say for example we could put after, let's say we wanted to put it after acacia log, right? So we would do items.acacia log.default instance. So let's just do that. And we need to do get default instance. And then it wants a tab visibility. Do we need a tab visibility? We do. Tab visibility dot. Let's just do parent and search tabs. And if we do that, and if we rerun the game, in theory that should put it after acacia log. And if we come into here, we should see it's after the acacia log, and it is. So that does actually work like that as well. And that should be in the search bar as well, in the exact same place. So that's a pretty cool thing you can do. Now, the keen-eyed of you will notice that we do have this tab thing up here, so we can select between the different tabs. Obviously, I don't know why this button is active, but it is for the moment. And you'll see our example tab here, and it's got our example item, it's got our example block, and it's got the crossbow. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So it's obviously got our name, it's got our icon here, and it's scrollable. We didn't say to have a search bar, but maybe we would want a search bar, in which case we would just say, with search bar, and you could specify a specific width of like 200, but I assume there's a default width that comes with this. Yeah, the default width is 89, which is probably this width here. Is that about 89? Yeah, probably. I would say that's about 89. And yeah, that's it for CreativeTab. So I hope you found it useful. If you're having any problems, be sure to join my Discord server, which is linked in the description of this video. And yeah, obviously give it a like if you found it useful, and subscribe so you know when I post the next one. I don't actually know what the next tutorial is going to be on right now. probably tools and armor, maybe. We'll see. I haven't decided yet, so it may be something completely different. And yeah, I will see you then. Goodbye.